Hey, welcome to Grace Speaks. My name is Chris Carpio. I'm one of your hosts here, and with me we have
Katya Gonzalez.
Alexa Moran.
Armin Sommer.
Our guest.
our special guest. Nice. Well, last time you were on, you ruined the surprise.
Did I really?
Well,
Yeah.
maybe that was the time before last.
Oh,
Have we only had you on once or twice?
Yeah,
I've
we've
only
only
been
had
on
once.
once.
Oh,
I didn't-
okay.
He
For
started
some
us
reason,
off.
you never invited me back until now.
Yeah. Well, now you're back, and
Welcome back.
Yeah,
Yes.
we're gonna do another behind the sermon
Yeah.
today.
Okay.
So,
This is my favorite.
Just so you know, I was hurt.
oh yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure.
We'll
We'll
invite you
send
back.
chocolate and flowers
Okay.
to make up
that
for
sounds
it.
good. I like that.
So we're doing a behind the sermon for Facing Our Fears series, the Facing Our Fears series that we just started, right? And with that, we have our first question, which is similar to the ones that we always ask whenever we do these, but obviously the answer is different every time. So here is the question: what was the inspiration behind the Facing Our Fears series? Like, what inspired you to choose this topic specifically?
That's actually a very revealing, probing question, because the thing that inspired me to do it was processing my own fear.
Oh,
Wow.
really? So what do you mean by that?
We're getting deep here.
Yeah.
I was
off of
afraid.
that.
I'm afraid to.
Many fears.
Well, I mean, so my greatest fear is fear of loss, specifically fear of loss of vision.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so it was a very personal message for me. And when I thought about addressing my own personal fear, I thought to myself, you know what? There are probably a number of fears out there we could explore.
Yeah.
One of them would be the fear of death. One of them is also the fear of God. A long time ago, I preached a message about the fear of the Lord. And a guy I know in the church had actually heard me preach a message on it back when I was in Colorado. And he attends our church now in New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
And he had
He liked
commented
you.
on
He
it.
liked you that much.
He followed you.
He was like, oh, man.
No, it's kind of serendipitous that he ended up at our church. But he,
Vocab word of the day.
yeah, okay. Means it's just by chance.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
why use a small word if I can use a big one?
I know. You just
So-
sound so much smarter.
It's also a fun word. Like
Yeah.
serendipitous.
Yeah, serendipity, yeah. But so then I also thought, and then I wasn't sure. So I thought, well, a 4-part series, topical, it would give us some space prior to heading back into 1 Corinthians. And normally I like to, punctuate an expository series, a verse-by-verse series,
Yeah.
chapter-by-chapter series,
Yeah.
with just one topical series. In fact, you asked me about this back a few weeks ago. You said, how come we were doing 2 topical series in a row?
Yeah.
And I went, because I didn't want to start the 1 Corinthians 15 series yet.
Yeah.
That was my only reason.
I thought it was funny because we had just finished the podcast around that time where we said like, oh yeah, usually we don't do really that many topical messages, and then we started doing like a lot of topical
Until now.
messages, and I was like, oh okay, it's fine.
Yeah, so I ended up thinking, and then on the other one, I wasn't sure what we should do, so I left it up to one of the other communicators, and it was suggested to do fear of persecution, which I thought was relevant, especially in this environment in which we live globally as well as even in America today. But for me personally, the fear, I was really processing my own fear, and it really is a big fear. It was a big step for me to address this, because one of the things that we were always told in seminary was to be careful about processing your own stuff in a sermon.
Yeah, I
So
was going to ask you about that because I remember you saying it from the pulpit. Like, normally they tell you not to do this. I'm going to do it anyway. So I kind of want to ask you about that.
It was, I felt the need to be self-revealing, and maybe, and part of it may have been selfish on my part, because I just felt like I needed to do it, because it was a very difficult, it's been difficult for me for the last 15 years, because what I've seen is every year, the scariest moments for me are every 3 months when I go to the eye doctor. And he takes the pressures on my eyes, and he stands before me and he'll tell me to cover one eye, and he'll hold his hands to the side, and he'll hold up the number of fingers. So how many fingers am I holding? And I've noticed that it's harder and harder to see those fingers. And then when he does a visual field test, which is where you're looking inside of a hood, and there are these blinky lights, and you have to press a button and they use a computer to chart your visual field. And when you're sitting there for the better part of half a minute or so, and you're not seeing any blinky lights, you must be missing some.
Yeah.
And so, not this last time, but the time before, I was trying to game the system, and I was kind of guessing.
Yeah.
And so when I
based on the timing, you think it'll be,
And the doctor came in, and I asked him, I said, so how did I do? And he goes, well, he said, you weren't exactly the most reliable test subject. And so I realized that I shouldn't do that. But when I was first diagnosed with this particular form of glaucoma, I didn't really think that much about it until I read one of my journals, and I just happened to be going through it, and I found this journal that I wrote in March of 1995, which, by the way, was before you were born.
He's looking at me.
Yeah, because I was around for sure.
Also
Katya wasn't born either.
Yeah, you weren't born either, but you were.
I was.
You were like one. And
toddling around.
Right? Yeah. And so that was, it was just a really difficult thing for me to process. And every quarter, when I go, it's just kind of a weird thing. And I was really hoping against hope that the surgeries and the medications would be, so the medication works for a while, and then it doesn't work so well.
Yeah.
And so then they change the medication, and then they put you on a really expensive medication, all that kind of junk. But so when I prepared this message, I ran it by my wife first, and asked her what she thought, and she was kind of thoughtful about it. Huh. She's a very quiet person in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But also, we've been married 45 years, so
I think she's so cool.
She is. She knows me really well, and she should. And I realized I needed to go through this whole thing with her first, because I wasn't. I realized when I processed it with her, it was hard for me to get through it, and I'm really glad that I did that. Before I would have to stand in front of the congregation and deliver it.
That's also really healthy to do, like with your spouse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And she knows everything about me.
Right.
She really is. Not only is she my wife, mother of my children, but she really is my best friend. And there are times in your marriage, you go through phases in your marriage. I'm really going all over the map.
Hey, it's okay.
Yeah,
no, this is good.
Stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
But you go through phases, and you'll see this, and
I'll learn.
see this, and hopefully someday, Chris, you'll see this.
Yeah. Right now I only have 2 dogs.
Yeah, I know. Well, anyway, so Kuro and Chai, right?
Kuro and Chai.
They're
Kuro
so
and
cute.
Chai. But so when you're courting your spouse, you want to put your best foot forward. And you're really trying to impress them, and you want to win them. And then when you get married, kind of like, all right, got that job done, and you don't think so much about trying to be the person that your spouse needs, because one of the reasons why you got married is because it's to fulfill your need. And but you get to a point in your marriage where you've seen your kids grow up. You've seen them have their own children. You've seen them go through their own difficulties. And it not only affects you as a parent to view them differently, but it affects you as a spouse, and you begin to relate to one another in a very different way, probably. And I don't want to say necessarily a better way, because each phase has its really good things. When you start out, there's that passionate phase, and then you enter into more of a partnering phase because you're raising kids, and then they become your confidant and confessor. Really, she knows things about me that nobody knows.
Yeah.
And it's a very. I mean, I really admire my wife. She has a. I mean, we've been in the ministry together. I mean, she supported me when I was in seminary, and so I we got married in 1976. I'd been a school teacher, and we started seminary in 77, and she supported me. Now here she is. She has a degree in economics, right?
Yeah.
And when we moved to Colorado, the job market was so tight. She started out as a typist, and her salary was $450 a month.
Wow.
And we had to pay a month of her salary to the employment agency that found the job for her.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember we'd buy a chicken and we'd quarter it, and we'd have 4 meals out of that, and then we'd take the carcass and make soup out of it.
Wow. Hey, get
and
creative.
made our own yogurt and junk like that.
With chicken bones?
No.
I'm going to help with different ingredients.
I'm just kidding.
No, we made Jell-O with that. And glue.
Right.
But so I got into the habit a long time ago of processing things with Nancy. And so she had supported me through seminary. And then when we, and she had worked her way through rising through the corporate structure of the bank where she worked, and savings and loan, and was on the track to become in the leadership development track. And then I got a pastorate, going to the bottom of the barrel in a sense of being poor in an expensive state, New Jersey. Which is one of the places that I told God. I said when I got out of seminary, I told God we'd go anywhere He wanted us to go, except for overseas. Specifically, I didn't want to go to Africa because it just I just thought the dark continent. I don't know. I'd get lost there and get sick and die.
Yeah.
And I said I wouldn't go there, and I wouldn't go to New Jersey.
Yeah. Well, now you realize the wrong ways of your thinking. New Jersey is actually the best state in the world.
Or do you still think that way? No, I'm kidding.
No, I love New Jersey. I in fact, when we were here for 12 years at Grace, and then I thought that my next step was to become, to pastor a large, mega church, and so I went out and pastored a larger church out in Colorado Springs, and I realized that what you think that you want to do is not necessarily what you really want to do. And I moved out there, and I realized that I'm a Jersey boy, and I didn't fit, and I found myself getting very annoyed with people who felt sorry for me for being from New Jersey.
Yeah.
It really bugged me.
Yeah, you don't even feel sorry for me. I'm from New Jersey.
Yeah, and
I'll beat you up.
I'm tough.
Well, I even
Let's
said,
go.
I said, well, don't ever go there because you won't last a week.
Yeah. And then I'll feel sorry for you.
Yeah.
No, I won't. I won't even feel sorry for you.
My daughters are, so one lives in Colorado still, and one lives in upstate New York, and they both are very defensive about New Jersey. Like, hey, come on, don't mock New Jersey, otherwise I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
It's funny how that comes out of you when people mock New Jersey. You're just like, oh, let's go. Let's go.
Yeah,
Let me show
let's
you.
go with that.
Yeah,
it is like
come on.
that.
You think your state is so great?
Yeah, come on.
Where? Where do you live?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And whoops.
Do you have mountains and shores? Didn't think so. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Right.
But anyway, so that's a little history of my relationship with Nancy.
Well, that all came from basically the first question, which was what was the inspiration. But I think it also draws out a really good point, which was kind of what you were saying before. It's like in seminary you learned that it was a danger to process your emotions on stage, in the sermon. However, I think your story kind of indicates the fact that you didn't process that
Right.
in front of the church.
Yeah, like you went to Nancy first.
You went to Nancy, and not only that, you didn't like bring a like bundle of yarn to the church and then say like, this is how I feel, and then the church was like, oh, we see how you feel.
Yeah.
You know, we feel that too. It was more like,
we feel so bad for
it was more like, this is what I've learned.
Yeah, it
from
wasn't like
this
an
experience.
it wasn't
you know?
like an unpacking of baggage. It was this is this is my fear. I'm sharing it with you in a real way because I understand that you also feel the same way, and God talks about this. So let's talk about it,
Right.
Like
kind of
how-
way.
Yeah, it was very like actually like very pastoral. So
Yeah.
I don't,
good.
I really appreciate
I think it was
the-
very encouraging.
Yeah.
To hear
I'm glad to hear that.
your story.
I mean, I still have a lot of, so here I preach this message, and I really was sincere in the things about, if anybody happened not to have listened to the message, which probably is a lot of people, I spoke about how, to view your thorn as an opportunity for God to work deeply in your life, and what helped me was seeing how Paul processed the sovereignty of God, his own human weakness, and then the mystery of unanswered prayer, and it was very helpful to me to ponder. And so I've actually been thinking about this for quite some time, because I realize, this thorn that I have, as frightening as it is, I've really had to come to terms with it, and thinking through what will it mean. It means that my mother, when she was 81, is when she died. By the time she died, she was legally blind. She only had pinpoint vision in one eye. She had the same thing I have.
Yeah.
Now, there have been advances since then, but the problem with the kind of glaucoma that I have is it really is the death of the progressive death of your eye. It causes the progressive death of your optic nerve, and you don't ever get that back. They have never produced anything. They may be experimenting with stem cells and things like that, but that's way in the future.
Yeah.
And so I realize that that could be my future. So I've had a number of conversations recently with a guy in our church who is entirely blind, and he and I have talked about this, and I've asked him about how he gets through it, and he would call me on the phone and text me, and we had a number of very in-depth conversations, and I just discovered today that he died.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
He's
Really?
part of our church, and he died yesterday at
Wow.
5 p.m. And it was really, and I thought to myself, wow. But he had gone through probably the last 10 years, 10, 15 years, completely blind.
Wow.
And I'm like, well, deal with it, Armin. You've got to deal with this.
Yeah. And if anything, he was able to show you how.
Right.
Yeah. He really, he's a guy who was full of joy and very grateful for God's goodness to him. Really is. So anyway, I don't mean to go off on that. But that really frames a lot of my day-to-day existence, because there are several different medications I got to take, and I have to go to the eye surgeon frequently, and and I'm prayerfully hoping that the surgery that what I had a few months ago, that really will be successful in slowing it down
Yeah.
very well. I'm
Definitely.
hoping.
Definitely, if you're listening to this, definitely worth praying for.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
appreciate
definitely
that.
pray.
That's definitely one way you can pray for your pastor, which is always important to be doing.
Yeah.
So how about that next question? Who's
Yeah.
up?
What else you want to know?
I feel like you kind of touched on it, but if you could kind of think about it a little bit. But what is the most important thing while you were like preparing the sermon series that you would want the people listening and also coming to church to listen to it, get out of it?
Yeah. I mean, in general, like a principle, or what guides me. So the basic philosophy that guides me, and regardless of whether it's expository verse by verse preaching through a book, or a topical exposition, which means you find a passage that deals with that, and then you study it and exegete that passage, or if it's just straight up topical, where you find a whole bunch of information in various diverse scripture passages that touch on it. I try to prepare a message the same way that you'd listen to a TED Talk.
Okay.
And so in a TED Talk, in fact, I remember when I found this on LinkedIn and I sent that thing out. Maybe you don't.
No, I remember, yeah.
And it was so affirming, because I read this article by the guy who I can't even remember his name, but he's the one who really advises speakers on how to frame their TED Talks. And he said that the way you do it is you have one thesis statement, which we call the big idea.
Yeah.
And then everything, every major division or point that you bring up in your message is to support that thesis statement, that big idea. And I was like, wow, eureka. You know? And,
it's like writing
exactly
a paper.
what we do.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do. And I thought, oh, wow. But so that's really what we try to do. And I realize that there are other ways to communicate, but the way that we do it, that everybody has really been very, I mean, at first, I think it was difficult at first for our teaching team, because it was like, well, wait a minute, there are other ways to communicate and do large-scale communication. And I said, yeah, you're right, but we're going to do it this way.
Yeah.
And it produces a really unified product. And I've found that the teaching team, I originally started it because I wanted to help our teaching team, but what I found is that it's helped me.
Yeah.
Because I have to be open to receiving criticism, better ways of saying things, more relevant ways, because let's face it, I'm an old guy. and if you have some younger team members, it really helps to get their insights.
Sometimes Armin uses old slang, and I don't know what it means.
He's like, what is that?
I don't remember what the last word that you guys used was, but you guys all said something, and then everyone's like laughing, and I was like, I don't understand what this means.
Right.
And I don't think
I said automatopoeia.
No, it wasn't
No?
onomatopoeia.
I do know what that means.
It was something else. But I was like, I don't think anybody my age would have known it, because it meant something else to us. Like, it was like a word that meant something else to us.
I remember this,
Yeah.
but I can't remember the word.
I know, I can't remember
I
it
wish
either.
I'd.
So back to Katya's question.
The big
Yeah,
idea.
what's the big
What
idea of the whole
basically
series?
of the series, like what is one thing that you hope they will like walk away with, like from the
Right.
series, not necessarily how you got there, but just like what you want them to walk away with.
If I had to think of a big idea for the series,
Yeah.
which I really haven't written into the series because we have 3 different communicators for it.
Yeah.
And so I haven't really imposed that on the
Yeah.
group. But for me,
Yeah.
there would be 2 possible big ideas. And that is, the first one is that if you draw closer and closer to God, it changes what you fear and why you fear it. And so
That's so good.
it really, but
Yeah.
it's true,
No, it
so the closer you get to God, the more fear and trembling that you may have, in the sense when you realize the holiness of God.
Right.
But it also changes it changes the character of your fear. You're not afraid of death itself. You may be afraid of the process,
Right.
but you're more, I find myself, the older I get, I talk with, and Nancy and I have chatted about this many times, that it's the prospect of standing before God and Him simply asking me questions, and now tell me why you did this, and
Yeah.
I'm like, well, Lord, I was really being a jerk, but knowing also that He delights to show mercy and grace. And I keep on reminding myself, if you were to read my journal, much of my daily journaling, centers on giving thanks to God for his mercy and his grace, because nobody in the church really sees who I am. Nobody.
Yeah.
They don't know the darkness that still resides in the core of my sinful nature, things of which I would be ashamed to have put up on the screen. And I'll probably regret saying this in a podcast. But I know that God loves me despite that. And I don't have to pretend to be anything different to him. I don't have a role to play before God.
Yeah.
When I stand before the congregation, I want to make sure my hair is, nicely, whatever, and I put like gel in it, and I try to move this, mass of hair around, and
You're so blessed to still have so much hair.
Well, yeah, I just kind of poof it up a little bit.
It looks good though.
Make it, but and so there I am, and I realize there are people who see me as better than I really am, and I know I'm not. As good, and so that's not a problem for me to, generally speaking, and thinking that I'm just this wonderful person. I'm not. I'm really not. I'm a person that is an object of God's grace, his love, and his mercy, and probably the most awesome, and I hesitate to always use that word, but truly awesome thought that I can think of and that I picture is that when I go into his presence, there was a painting I saw, an artist's rendition some time ago of an individual in the presence of Christ. You don't see his face, but his face is buried on the shoulder of Jesus, who has his arms around him, embracing him. And the man is, I would imagine, probably sobbing, because he knows that he's there with the Lord, and that the Lord is with him and has received him. And that's what I think of as
That's a beautiful image.
It really is, and and as I ponder and I get closer to the end of my life, I think about that, and I ponder that image. It was really funny. Speaking of which, I was I met with my financial advisor on a Zoom call back, or actually it was a Zoom call a couple of weeks ago, because I'm getting near retirement, and so I wanted I wanted to see, do I have enough, financial resources to live? And because I'm concerned that I have, and so when we met together, I had gone on to this insurance site where they had this thing. It's probably a marketing thing, but it popped up on my on one of my pages, and I was like, oh, I'll do that. And I did the calculator, how much you exercise, what's your body mass index. How
Is this going to calculate how long?
Yeah, how long I
Okay,
live.
got it.
And so,
Wait, did he mention this last time?
No.
No, I don't think I did.
No, he didn't.
And I plugged it, because I only did this in the last few weeks.
Oh, okay.
And I plugged it in, and non-smoker, all this kind of stuff.
Swim every day.
Swim every day, and all this kind of junk. And it said, you're going to live to 95. And I was like, whoa, sweet.
Nice.
And so then I was talking with my financial planner. He goes, well, let me see what I come up with. And he goes, he says, mine's a little different. It was on the screen. It said I was going to live to 76. And I thought, okay, this is like a marketing thing. And not with him. But I just thought,
I know. That's
I don't know, the swimming thing. It could. No.
You never know.
Going back to what you were saying before about the takeaway, and then we started.
We keep sidetracked.
I do kind of go off, don't I?
I like it.
But the second one, because you gave the first one.
Yeah.
But the second one, what would you say the second one that you could get out of it?
Because you said there was two.
Yeah, because one is
what did I say for the first one?
Is when we draw closer to God, our fears change, why we fear them and what we fear.
I want to share a Charles Spurgeon quote with that first one real quick.
Okay, I guess we'll allow it.
Go for it.
It's the fear of God is like the death of every other fear. Yeah, that's it.
Let that sink in.
Yeah.
Well, it was very interesting. That's interesting. You kind of stole my second one from me, because what I would say is
because you're Charles Spurgeon.
No, but the more you fear God, the less you fear anything else.
Yeah. Because fears trump each other. You know?
They do.
That's
Fears
true.
trump each other. Like,
It's like a would you rather. Like if you're given two situations,
Yeah.
you pick one or the other. So it's kind of like fears the same way.
Like, would you rather, like if you're afraid of heights, you know, would you rather go bungee jumping, or would you rather be thrown into a pit of sharks?
Bungee jumping. What?
Exactly. But you're afraid of heights. But you're more afraid of sharks.
Well, there's.
Do I have a
You
cut?
see what I'm saying?
Because then I would pick the bungee jumping. But if I don't have a cut, then maybe the shark.
Wow.
So I think your fears like trump each other, you know,
They do.
where it's like your fear of God, like, so like say, oh, I have like this social fear of like speaking with people, but like you have like this like fear of God that also comes with the understanding that like the wrath of God is on that other person, and so you're like, well, I like don't want them to like end up that way, so I'm going to like trump my fear of social anxiety to like share the
I see what you're
gospel
saying.
with them.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like I'm still processing it, but
Yeah.
I
but
think you're
it's-
onto something with the fear trumping other fears.
yeah, I
Yeah.
just don't know how to really articulate it that well, but I'm working through it.
I think you're saying well.
Okay, thanks.
So you're kind of like trying out your message.
Yeah,
for-
right now.
Yeah, I'm trying out some
Yeah.
I kind of like spilled that quote a little early there,
I like
but
that. Yeah.
Little teaser.
a little teaser.
Well, now you
for-
know Chris's big idea for his message.
Yeah, I'm teaching on the fear of God, so get ready.
It's gonna be
Get
good.
ready.
It's gonna be a great message. Yeah.
Do you guys know what the number one fear is? It's
Uh,
public speaking.
public speaking.
You
Yeah.
know what number two is? Death.
Yeah.
So people would rather die than
Then
public speak.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah.
I think it's crazy.
It is
See,
crazy.
that's so funny.
I mean, I get it.
Armin's like, I public speak all the time.
Yeah, but I feel
To
like
me, it's
even when
fun.
you first
Yeah.
start, I don't know. For me, when I first started, even still sometimes, like, you know, I have like a lot of like, you know,
The nerves.
nerves
Yeah.
like
Right.
before I go up and stuff like that, but it's definitely easier for me than some other people that were in my public speaking class.
Right.
Like I'd see them go up and they would just like freeze, you know,
Oh.
and I was just like, okay, like I definitely don't have it as severe as some people, but I
Right.
still feel it sometimes. It depends on the context. Like my youth group, I'm like fine in my youth group. I don't have
Right.
that, but it depends on how used to the venue you are.
That's true.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
like if Armin were to go and, you know, speak with, you know, Billy Graham or something, like go speak like and be invited to speak like next to him or something like that back in the day, then like I feel like you'd probably be kind of nervous, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you think you'd
Well-
be like a little nervous
I feel like you wouldn't.
Do you remember?
in front of like 10,000 people?
Did you ever hear of D. James Kennedy?
Yes.
Yeah. So I was. This is hysterical for me. So I was when Star 99,
Yes.
Oh,
way
yeah.
back when it was family radio. So I was asked to be the soloist at their annual banquet for.
Like violin or
Oh.
singing?
vocal.
Vocal. Okay, I was just checking.
You went to school
Wait,
for
do you
this.
sing?
I know.
Huh?
You sing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
a
he
music
did.
teacher. I was, yeah, and I
He's a
did-
pro.
I did not know this about you.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I was, yeah, and I was.
We'll get a little sample at the end. Here.
Yeah, sure.
Oh yeah, that'd be fun.
But I was a performer, so
Stay tuned.
Um,
Stay tuned for the end.
and I let you. So that kind of thing, you know, was just it's kind of like any performer. You know, you're kind of like, you know,
Right.
Yeah.
you like doing it,
Yeah.
except for that night.
Yeah.
Really?
I was sitting at the head table with D. James Kennedy,
Oh.
and you know, he was the originator of Evangelism Explosion and pastor of Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church in
Yeah.
Florida. He's with the Lord now. But he came up to me afterward, and I had done a particular rendition of the Lord's Prayer by Malat. Malat was the composer,
Okay. Yeah.
and he said to me, "Could I get a recording of that song?" And I said, "Oh, well, I haven't made a recording." He goes, "No. He says, I'd like to get a recording of the audio track that you used." Because he liked the accompaniment,
Yeah.
but he wasn't asking for a recording.
God.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
my God.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh," and I actually had it, you know, on a recording, and I gave
Yeah.
it to him. I just said, "Here, you can have it."
Yeah. It's like
Thanks, Doc.
yeah.
Oh wow.
man. Well,
But he was, he was a classy guy. He really
Yeah.
was. It was a, yeah. So that was way. When was that? That had to be
some time ago.
30 years ago.
Oh,
30 years ago.
It had to be 30 years ago.
5 years before I was born.
Yeah, because
Can you guess my age?
36 years ago. I can't
Terrible at
remember.
math.
25.
What's the math?
The math. Yeah.
No.
All right, so I have a question for you, Armin.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what was something that you learned while doing this? Because you talked about how, like, doing the sermon series and prepping for it, like, what was something that you learned or surprised you? Because, you were pretty candid that you were sort of processing, in a way, your own fear. But was there something else that you learned aside from that? Like, did you learn something from the other fears or something about about your fear that you didn't realize before?
It was, I think, I would say, this particular series.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
series.
This series helped me to process my fear of letting go at Grace,
Oh, wow, really? How?
Wow.
because I've deliberately made a decision that going into this series, I was going to really begin to rely more on the teaching team to do more of the stuff, and there were a number of fears I had about that, because my motivation is I realize that in just a few months, I'm no longer going to be. I'm not going to be there,
Yeah.
present, to be leading the team,
Yeah.
and I also realize that where we are in our search process, it's certainly not a lock that they may have somebody by the
Yeah.
time I'm done, and so I realized a few months ago I really need to see the team begin. I need to see the people begin to observe and to regard the team members as the teachers at Grace Church, not Armin Sommer.
Yeah.
And so it was when I came up with the idea, when it hit me, like, do this series on fears, I was thinking through that whole thing of what's it going to be like to be done. And I thought, that's kind of scary. But it made me come to terms with that. And so that's the reason why I decided to go 3 weeks in a row where I wasn't speaking,
Yeah.
which
Okay.
we just
We just talked about.
just got,
Yeah.
and have somebody and have different guys speak, and also, just kind of shine the spotlight a little bit differently. That's probably that's probably the most useful lesson that I think I've learned over my ministry career has been, it will never hurt you as a leader to allow somebody else to stand in the limelight.
That's actually a really tough thing for leaders to realize too, I feel like.
Well, it was tough for me to learn, but having internalized that lesson, I've learned that when you allow other people to stand in the spotlight and to receive the accolades for the hard work that they do, it always reflects well on you. It never
That's
reflects
true.
poorly on you. People
very
won't say, "Oh, well, how could you let that person shine?" What they'll do is they'll recognize that's what you should do as a leader, and not only that, the people that who are your teammates will really regard you not simply as a guy who wants to throw and receive all the passes, but as a guy who really wants to function as a leader of a team and allow other people to score the touchdowns.
Yeah.
I'm using these football analogies.
Yeah, I don't
Do you like
understand any
football?
of them.
Yeah, I'm
No,
sure.
I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
of course. But you know what I mean? And,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so,
no, 100%.
and that's something that that has really been a valuable lesson for me. And I don't always do that well. I mean, there are times. I got to be honest with you. When we first went to the 6 o'clock service,
Yeah.
and Shagun started taking my messages, and well, he would write some of his own messages, but he would also take messages that I wrote and he would preach them. But the thing is, when he did them, he improved them. And I remember I'd sit there at 6 o'clock, hear him preach. I think, wow, man, I wish I could have said it that way. I wish I could have said it with just that same tone. Even if he said the same thing, he said it better. And how Kenny often says, just say it better.
Just say it better.
And
Thanks, Kenny. Very productive.
And it took me about 2 years to overcome
Wow.
that sense of fear that people will stop appreciating me.
Yeah.
And you know what? And now I wish I hadn't taken so long in my life to get to this point, but I'm glad. And I don't. It's not that I don't want to imply that I deserve like some kind of admiration or credit for it. It's just it really is beneficial to come to that point where you realize that you're not the measure of your ministry, that the people who are on your team are really the measure of your ministry.
Yeah. I feel like it's kind of a relief too.
It is. You may have heard of Henry Cloud. Henry Cloud is a psychologist, and he's a Christian ministry leader as well, but a Christian counselor.
Yeah.
Written many books. Boundaries is one. Another one is Finishing Well.
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Another one is Integrity. And he uses an illustration in his book, Integrity. He talks about if you want to see how something is doing, you don't just look at where the ship is going in the water. You look behind it and you look at the wake that's left behind. And he said that's really what will do more to tell you about the influence of a leader is to look at the wake that is left behind the passing of the ship. And I remember I used that when I spoke at a friend of mine. He used to be the youth pastor at Grace, Ray Kolbacher.
Yeah.
And Ray, he had his 20th anniversary at this church, and he went to this little church, and I was so proud of him. He went. I spoke at his installation back in 1995.
I was around.
Yeah, you were alive. In 1995, and I spoke at his installation, and I think for his installation service, there were 80 people.
Wow.
And now he has 2,000.
Oh, that's awesome.
And a lot of the people on his team have gone on to other churches to pastor them and to succeed in marvelous ways, and he's never backed away from allowing other people to shine, and it's so wonderful
That's amazing.
to see him, and he's really a trophy in that way.
That's awesome. Well, we're at the 43-minute mark here, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you one more question.
Okay, go ahead.
But the question is, what things do you wish you could have kept in this sermon that just did not make the cut?
That's my favorite question.
I do love this question.
Just
Wow.
did
It's
not
like
make the
really
cut.
behind the sermon.
So, you got to realize I did the final edit on this message like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, but we talk about it in the teaching team, and we just talked
do.
about it last week, right? Was that last week or the week before that?
Oh, we talked about it. No, we talked about it
Because remember, we talked about the whole thing about Paul.
I mean, it could be about the sermon series. It doesn't necessarily have to be the sermon.
Yeah, was there maybe another
I
fear
could've-
that you wanted to put in that you didn't put in? Why? didn't
Oh, you mean the series?
Yeah, it could be the series.
It could be the series or the sermon.
Oh.
You can choose.
kinda
We'll
go
allow
You
it.
go back
Yes.
and forth on it.
That's
Well,
a good one.
yeah.
Was there a fear that was left out or
Yes,
thought of?
there was actually a fear
Oh,
that was
yeah?
left out. Fear of failure.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And
Man, I would like
I
to-
really
Yeah.
thought about assigning that, and then I thought, well, that may not be legit because some other people may not struggle with it. I mean, that's a fear.
I just want to go ahead and say that I think everybody struggles with
I
that.
struggle with that.
I definitely
I
do.
do.
I
Yeah.
feel like
Really?
especially for
Oh, I'm not that
maybe
weird.
it's not.
No.
Maybe this is just because I'm only speaking for my demographic, but I feel like people in their 20s really struggle with the fear
Oh,
of failure.
100%.
Like-
Our generation and younger are really struggling with that because
I
of.
got news for you. That's not a generation.
That's why.
Oh, I don't think it is a
That's what I
generation.
was
I'm
like-
just saying.
I think maybe it's just like intensified at different seasons of life, especially whenever you're starting a new chapter. Like whether it be like just adulthood in general,
Right.
or whether it be being like married or being a parent, or like
A new job.
a new job,
Yeah.
or ending a job, like, am I going to end
Applying
it well?
colleges, all of the
Right,
things
yeah.
you need to
Yeah,
do
there's
for
like
that.
101 different places.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's the beginning of a new season, though, that you
Mm-hmm.
fear the failure of it, and then it stops you either from like actually entering that season, or you go in with the expectation of failure, and then you don't actually like put in your all because you're just already expecting the worst.
Right.
And you kind of give up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that probably would
It's
have been
almost
a
like
good
a
one.
self-fulfilling prophecy. You kind of go like, oh, I'm going to fail anyway. So you kind of go with
Yeah.
that attitude. And then you fail anyway, and you're like, see, I knew it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, and most of those, the most intense times of fear of failure for me, there are two specific events or periods of my life. One of them was when I had finished college. It was in the middle of the year, and I got a call. I was done with my preparation in music education, and I was a fairly new Christian at that point. I had known the Lord for 2 years at that point, I think, or 1 year, 2 years, something like that. And I had gotten a call from a local public school near the college in a neighboring town. Their music teacher had gone out. She had cancer and they needed a replacement.
Yeah.
And my young adults pastor said, "Hey, you should really apply for that." And I was like, okay. And I did, and I got the job.
Oh.
And so all of a sudden, it's right after the Christmas holidays, and you got to come back, and I'm still living in my fraternity house.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go be a teacher
Yeah.
of these kids, and you got to realize that where I ended up teaching in K through 12 in this little rural school in upstate New York,
Yeah.
some of the kids were like 4 years younger than me.
Yeah.
We
We have people in our church that are like that are teachers,
Sure.
but that are like fairly young,
Yeah.
and they're just a couple of years older than their seniors.
So that was a really fearful thing for me. And then the second thing was when and there are actually probably three fears. The second thing was when I went to seminary and started in the Master of Divinity program there. And a lot of the guys there, and you got to realize I was one of the younger people. The average age in seminary, even now, is generally guys in their early 30s.
Okay.
Yeah, it's and so here I am. I'm like, what was it, 26 or something like that, and I've been a school teacher, but most of these guys had Bible college degrees. I didn't have any of that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I didn't know some of the terminology, and I remember asking a few embarrassing questions of that showed my ignorance in class.
Yeah.
And I felt like a real, dummy. I really did. And so as a result, unfortunately, that fear of failure drove me more toward obsessive concern and preoccupation with performance. And so I just thought, you know what, I'm gonna graduate with, honors if it kills me. And so it drove me, and that's one of the reasons that drove me to, like, even we talked about studying Greek and all that kind of stuff. It was really basically a fear of failure that drove me until it became a love for me.
Oh, wow.
And then the last,
Just like you were saying
sounded
earlier.
something like there was something in that.
Yeah.
It was a fear until it drove me to love.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe
Well,
there's
you'll
something
have
in
to
that.
think about
Yeah, I'm
that.
gonna think about that one.
and then the third one was when I actually was done with seminary,
Yeah.
and I moved back to Jersey, and I was on staff at a church, and I had no idea how to do what I was going to do, and that was to be so my job was to teach in the Christian school, which, I mean, I knew how to do that,
Yeah.
but to lead the college and career group, the young adult group,
Yeah.
and to handle all their music programs, and to co-host a radio program with the senior pastor.
Wow. That's why you're so good at this.
A lot of
Yeah.
hats,
No,
a lot of
This
hats.
is like back at your roots, this podcast.
Yeah,
right
this
now.
kind of is. Yeah, I love
But
doing
that's a
this.
lot
Bookend.
all at once.
It was, and I was thrown into it, and it was just really scary for me.
But
Yeah.
so I was watching this YouTube video yesterday because, YouTube videos is where you learn everything.
Of course.
Truth.
It
And
didn't exist when I. Yeah.
And he was saying, this guy that I was watching, he was kind of giving like a life update and stuff. And he was just giving like one lesson in life that he feels has been like instrumental. And I think throughout each one of your fears, it's like been there. And it's basically to start even before you think you're ready. Because every one of those instances, you sounded like you were not ready. Like, I'm sure you probably were like, oh, I need to leave the fraternity house before I start this job. Like, then I'll be ready, or like, oh, I need to, go to Bible college before I go to seminary, and then I'll be ready, or like, I need to go and study how it is that I'm supposed to be, like, managing all of these different things at once, and then I'll be ready, but instead, like, you weren't ready, you were afraid, but you weren't ready, and you ended up just equipping yourself like as you went along,
Yeah, it was a really, and going to, when I went down to, it was Manahawkin Baptist Church where I started. It was 1979, a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I remember I walked in, and they showed me where my office was. It was a converted closet in the basement.
Nice. Hey,
And there was an electrical
got to start
panel.
somewhere.
I mean,
Yeah.
you started from the bottom now.
It was really funny. It was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way
funny.
it was.
Let that be an encouragement to anybody whose office is currently a janitor closet.
Or in the
Yeah.
basement.
Yeah.
Or
in
under the
base-
stage.
Or under
Or
the
under
stage.
the stage.
Katya.
Like
Yes,
Katya.
yes.
It's okay. I like it there. My little bat cave.
That's awesome. Well, Armin, thank you so much for joining
Sure.
us.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
so
you.
Hey,
much.
it's fun.
And thank you
I
for
really-
being vulnerable with
Yeah.
us and those who are listening.
Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity. I'll probably regret it later, right?
No.
No, honestly, I really appreciate and admire you that you're able to be so
Yes.
open and real about, your fears and stuff. I think it's good for, all of us to hear and to, help encourage each other.
Yeah.
My wife could tell you a lot of stories.
Oh, we'll have to have
And we'll
her
get
on one
yeah,
time.
Nancy's
You
next.
should. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, yes.
Yeah.
Behind
the
behind the
things-
past.
Behind the past.
Wow.
Oh, new sermon series behind the
You guys just have like my two dogs on.
Yeah.
Asking them
So
questions.
Chad, how does Chris sermon prep?
Kuro, if it's a yes, wag your tail.
He's wagging it. He's wagging
he's
it.
wagging it.
That's
Very
awesome.
ferociously. Okay.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah,
It's good to
and thanks everybody for listening. As always, we appreciate you guys listening to what we have to say and how God is using this ministry.
Yeah.
And for the encouragement that you guys have shared already, the listeners, as to how this has been impacting your life. So we look forward to speaking to you guys in the next podcast, which is this is when Alexa usually takes over.
Okay. So it happens every second and fourth Friday of the month. So the next one will be the fourth Friday of the month.
Yep.
Nice. So we'll see you guys then.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.